Hi, this is Father Nathan again. In our previous podcast, we shared the story of Ray, the perfect gentleman. If you recall, he was the very first one of these stuck souls that came to me in a dream with a story of a violent, sudden death. He has a place in my heart because he got me started in this unusual work that the Holy Spirit's given me to do that I call my night job. The way that we've tried to organize this podcast is to first tell a story, which I did in the previous episode, then deal with questions and comments that came from people who learned of that story, who read about it or heard about it. Sometimes their questions are rather intellectual. They're about the afterlife in general. But what I learned pretty early was that most of the time when people come to me with a question prompted by one of these stories, it's usually because of a loved one. Somebody they love and care about has died, left this plane, and they can't help but wonder about their loved one. How are they? Where are they? Things of that kind. So, uh, compassion means to suffer with, and sometimes the suffering of grieving people is very explicit, and other times it's more subtle and sort of in the background. But what I want to do in this episode is compassionately respond to questions that have come up that were raised by the story of Ray. One of those has to do with time. Is there time in the afterlife? Well, at first I thought that no one paid attention to it. Why would you? You're not subject to its ways any longer. I don't know. I just formed that idea that people wouldn't pay any attention to time. I found that with a lot of other things, our lives are very specific and individual. The way that we form our imagination doesn't have to conform to some standard that everybody does. Some people I've found keep track of time on the earth and how their loved ones are moving through time. Others don't pay much attention to it at all. I found that, for example, when I wanted to ask people, so what year did you die? Ray, for example, came out with 1960 right away. Other people have had to fumble about for what seemed to me to be a very simple data point. Many of the people that I've dealt with are from the United States, and so I started asking them, can you remember who was the last president before you died? I know my presidents and my American history, so if they gave me a president's name, that at least put me in the neighborhood of when their death might have occurred. So is there time in the afterlife? Yes, but it can either be paid a close attention to or hardly any at all. Ray, of course, was very interested in greeting his wife when she passed, and he waited something like 40 years or more for that to occur. And that's what finally motivated him to seek me and my partners out to help him bring that about. So yes, people can pay attention to time in the afterlife if they want to. Can people who died visit us? Well, I think that's been well attested down through the ages, not just in Catholic or Christian storytelling and literature, but across disciplines and across religious bodies and so on. There certainly does seem to be what's sometimes called a thin veil. And then there's sometimes people that are very sensitive to the presence of a loved one. There are a lot of stories of children being especially sensitive and maybe being visited by grandparents after they passed. Um, it happens to me, and it happened before this particular phenomenon did. One thing that has surprised me in responses that I've gotten from people is sometimes they're alarmed by the fact that their loved one is contacting them or contacting some family member. And they sort of jump to a conclusion that that must mean they're stuck. If they're still here, they must not have moved on properly. So sometimes I'll get emails and contact with people that feel responsible for somehow fixing the problem of their loved one being stuck because it's evident to them that they keep showing up in visionary form or auditory or some way. And I try to tell them, no, it doesn't have to mean any one thing other than they love you. and want you to know that they're still paying attention, still around a little bit. Now, if the phenomenology, the dream or whatever the contact is, has some sort of a creepy, scary vibe to it, that might be another matter. In the Catholic tradition, there's a lot of literature in our mystical tradition of saints in particular being asked to pray for a particular person. Someone who has died might show up and speak back and forth with a saint who's a mystic and ask for prayers. That's well attested in Catholic literature. So yes, people can show up to us after they've died if they're motivated to do so. It does seem that there are differing degrees of receptivity to that kind of thing. Maybe in your circle, you have seen that yourself. Maybe you, for example, might be very sensitive, and it might be why you are so interested in this topic, where people around you or in your family or whatever uh, don't have any of the experiences that you do. I don't think that's surprising. Just as we have various degrees of musical aptitude or aptitude for learning a foreign language, athleticism, this to me looks like one more characteristic of a human person that that can be either strong or weak along a continuum. Maybe there are things that people can do to kind of turn it down if it's bothersome. I do a little bit of counseling that way, so that just because you have these sensitive gifts doesn't mean that you have to be open 24/7 to every passing thing. And sometimes I believe it's possible to, in a holy way, ask for those gifts to be magnified and try to be more available to such contact if it's in right order, if it's wholesome. Can there be afterlife reunions? That motivated Ray. That was about the only thing he was interested in. Can you be back with loved ones after dying? Over the last 25 years, I've helped about 400 people cross, probably more than that. And the ones that I get, of course, died sudden violent deaths. So that's a small subset of the whole human population. Many of us die peacefully in our sleep or of a long illness, but some do die suddenly and violently. What I've seen is that even among that population, sometimes there's a bit of greeting at the front end by someone familiar, someone who loves you. And then sometimes they let it be known that they're going to visit again, but right now you need to rest. Think of the way that you might visit someone after surgery or coming out of ICU. You can have a little bit of presence just as a reassurance that you love them and that you're present, but it's really not time yet for a lengthy visit. I've seen that happen. And then remember, our little role is just to help these traumatized souls make a passage from one plane to a next one. And other than anything that they might reveal to us in the simple dialogue that we have asking whether or not we may use their story, which is a yes or no question, it doesn't need to be a long conversation. But there have been times when people volunteer the fact that they've had happy reunions with loved ones. In some stories, for example, a spouse shows up to be the one to help that person make the journey from one plane to the next. It doesn't have to be. There's a great variety in how that happens. Who's the person who guides them from the realm that they're in to a next and higher plane. But yes, indeed, there can be reunions. And in fact, in Catholic Christian spirituality, it's one of the main things I've been taught to look forward to. I have so many people who have died. I'm 66 years old. A friend died today. I'm with each passing day, I have more friends in high places, if you will, people I look forward to seeing again. In prayer, I talk to them now. I don't often hear anything back, but that doesn't stop me from letting them know of my love for them and my interest in them. But yes, indeed, there absolutely can be afterlife reunions. Both parties have to want it. It has to be timely. Sometimes people want to have a reunion just to be back with loved ones and in some happy, peaceful setting. I've seen some who want to have a reunion with someone to solve a problem. For example, many of people that I've dealt with died in car crashes. What if your inattentiveness or your driving mistake not only took your life, but the life of someone else? I've known of some people who let it be known that they want to be reunited with the other people that were in the accident and apologize to them. I've seen that sometimes the guardians and the team of people in the afterlife who are helping them will say that's a noble idea, but it's just not timely yet. So sometimes an afterlife reunion is postponed a bit because it's just for some reason not timely. But I think it's perfectly within the joyful hope tradition. That's this broadcast is called Joyful Friar. Joyful hope is, I think, one of the bedrocks of my life. And I live in joyful hope that when I have to say goodbye to someone who has died, I absolutely hold out the hope. And not just the vague hope, but the very concrete hope that I'll get to be with them again. So, yes to that. What caused Ray to be stuck? Well, if you go back in it, he pretty much tells us in his own words, he was mad at God because the things that he had been taught about God made him blame God for his untimely, painful death at a young age. Who the hell does he think he is, taking me just when my life's getting good? Well, Ray had formed that idea. Have you ever done that in your own life? Have you ever created an idea about someone else that made relating with them difficult or even impossible? Think junior high. Did you ever think that somebody that you might have had a romantic interest in or attraction to was out of your league? You wouldn't dare ask her or him for a date or show them any kind of interest because you might have made up a story in your head that they would not be interested or that they might laugh at you. Well, we can create those kind of stories, and people can do that in the afterlife too. So Ray had created a story in his mind that God was responsible for burning him to death in a fire. He didn't want any part of that. And part of what he needed to do was reconsider. Here's a question. Do you have any false or incomplete information about something or someone? Sometimes when we come to an erroneous assumption about someone else, it's because we're acting on faulty information or at least paltry information. And then later, sometimes we come to discover there was more to the story than I understood. And sometimes the added facts are enough, if I'm humble, for me to go back and say to myself, I was wrong. Had I known then what I know now, I would never have formed that opinion. I would never have said those things or done those things. So this has to do with changing one's mind. The idea of purgatory for Catholic Christians, purge is the root word of that, and it has to do with cleansing. So that's one metaphor for changing one's mind. I can remember in Catholic elementary school that being explained with a mess on the blackboard, just taking chalk and making a mess on the blackboard and then taking the eraser and wiping it clean. That would be purging, cleansing. If you wanted to use that metaphor, you could think of bad information that you formed about something or someone being that mess, and then somehow another something brings clarity and a new truth that wipes clean that and you start over and think a new thought. It really comes down to, is it possible for you to change your mind? In the story of Ray, at the front end, he was absolutely stubborn about his certitude that his painful early death was God's fault, because that's what he'd been taught. And he accepted what he had been taught as just absolutely bedrock truth. We pushed against that some and said, well, there's other information about God that maybe you haven't considered. And maybe the person who told you that people die because God takes them like a body snatcher, maybe that person was giving you the best information they had at hand, but maybe they were just wrong. Well, he didn't like that idea. None of us really like being told we're wrong. When's the last time somebody told you that you were really mistaken about something and you received it humbly, reconsidered, maybe took in new information and changed? If it's been a while, go back to that question. How long has it been since I changed my mind about anything important? And if it's been a long while, ask yourself, could I possibly have an ego that's protecting itself even at the expense of the truth? Would I be a happier, truer version of myself if I could receive what others are trying to tell me that might set me in a new and freer direction? What would give you the power to do that? What's the most powerful force in the universe? Military weaponry? Well, that's powerful, all right, but not as powerful as love. Love was what motivated Ray after 40 years of being isolated in the afterlife because of his own choice. Love was the thing that got him moving. He loved his wife and wanted to be reunited with her. In fact, he wanted to be of service to her. I think he wanted to be there to receive her when she was dying and crossing. He loved that woman. He watched her for 40 years and waited for her death so that he could be present to it, to welcome her into her afterlife. It was his love for her that motivated him after all that time to consider that he might be wrong. In fact, I asked him in the little follow-up conversation where we got his permission to use his story, Ray, why do people die? Remember, his earlier answer was because God took them. But reflecting upon new experiences after welcoming his wife, because he did succeed at doing that, when we went back to him and asked his permission to use his story, I asked him that question, why do people die, Ray? And do you remember what he said? I don't know. I don't know. That's literally the word for I don't know is agnostic. A at the beginning of the word means not, and gnosis is knowledge. To be agnostic about a thing is to simply say, I don't know. I think wise people do that all the time. I don't know. Why do people die, Ray? He said two sentences. I don't know. And he followed it with, I could be wrong. So even though I asked him for his opinion, what I received back was, I don't know. I could be wrong. I believe that's just humility. And when you add humility and truth, I think you get power, real spiritual power, not coercion, but just the power of truth. Well, I hope you found this helpful. This is a compassionate response to questions arising from the story of Ray. In our next episode, we're going to move on to spiritual lessons and practices that might arise after considering the story of Ray. Thanks for being with me. You can always contact me through my website, which is nathan-castle.com. Go to the contacts part of the bar at the top. Click on that, and it'll give you the opportunity to fill out a little form that sends an email my way, and I'd be happy to be back in touch with you. God bless you. Bye-bye. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Joyful Friar. You can visit me at nathan-castle.com. Send me a message by clicking the contact button. If you'd like to support this podcast, you can make a donation by clicking the donate button. See you next time. God bless.